Hello and welcome to the Right Perspective Podcast, Interview Edition. I'm your host, Benjamin Davis, and I'm joined again by Pastor Munn. How you doing, Pastor?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here. The last one was good, and I'm thankful to be here to talk about another similar subject.
Yes, it was so good. If any of y'all have not listened to that, it's like no, it's actually going to be like 5 episodes again now, but it was really good. What was that one about?
It
My
was
mind is
about
blanking.
family worship.
Yes, I can't believe I forgot that. My mind just blanks at weird times. Must have young timers.
It happens. It happens to me too. It's honestly, it's why I preach from a manuscript because I don't want to get into a position where I forget what I'm talking
That makes a lot of sense.
about.
Okay, so today we're talking about some of the practicalities of why and how to take your kids out of public schools and just trying to address some of the fears there. I think a lot of Christians, if they understand how bad their public schools are here in America, they're afraid of taking their kids out. They feel like that's going to be worse for the kids, or maybe it's going to impede on a lot of their comfort. There's a lot
hmm
of different things going on. But first, Pastor Munn, why should we take our kids out of public schools? Why is that important?
Yeah. So to start off, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this last time, but me and my wife have 7 kids together, and our oldest, Dawson, we took him out of public school when he was after the 6th grade. And just along with this interview that we're doing here, I have to mention Bodie Baucham's sermon because that's really was the linchpin for me. Bodie Baucham has a sermon. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but if you type in Bodie Baucham Caesar, it'll come up. The whole premise of it is if you keep sending your children to Caesar to be taught, don't be surprised when they come back as Romans, because that's exactly what you see happening. One of the things we mentioned last time in the family worship episode is, kind of broadly speaking, that society culture, we're a big family and we're a big collection of households, and what happens in the household flows out into the culture. Well, and a lot of that is because it's where you're being taught, it's where you're being indoctrinated. And those who control the schools control really the spiritual environment of the society and culture. And so, I mean, one big thing is that a secular school, which is what the public school is always going to produce secular people. It's going to produce dull arrows that are out in the culture and not righteous arrows, because they're being taught to think. I mean, I don't know exactly how long they're in there for a day, but around 8 hours or so, you're being taught to think for hours on end a day about all of these subjects that find their origin in God, that show forth his character and the way he thinks in different ways. He's the God of history. Every subject has to do with God in some way, but they're being taught to think about these things in a godless way, totally void of God. And they're being trained for hours a day to think about subjects really just in a selfish way, just in a way that works for them. And the education is not pointed to its intended goal of glorifying God and producing a society of people who are moral and upright. Yeah, you shouldn't have your people in an environment. If you wouldn't send your child to like a Mohammedan school, or like an Islam school, or you wouldn't send them to a Hindu school or something like that, I think it should be very clear on why you wouldn't want your child in the public school system, because it is a secular system, and Jesus is very clear that if you're not for me, you're against me. And so the public school system is against Christ, because they're not seeking to teach things the way he would have his creations be taught.
So would you say even if it's like, okay, my public school, it's a small town school. It's not They're not doing all the trans stuff, the DEI stuff. It's just kind
Mhm.
of amoral. And I talked to my kid about what he's learning. Would you still say that person needs to take their kid out of the government schools?
Yeah, I would, because I would have the conviction that it's not the government's role to be a part of that in your child's life anyways. There's in some of this, I think there's an understanding of some sphere sovereignty issues, and where the government has a sphere of authority over the civil arena, and elders have a sphere of authority over the church, and parents do over their children. And so, just as it's not the government's role to teach doctrine and administer the sacraments to God's people, I don't believe that it's the government's role to decide specifically what your children need to learn. Now, the government can encourage the good. So I think, let's say we're in a Christian nation, and the majority is converted, and the government is reigning with and governing in accordance with a basis of God's moral law and the Ten Commandments. They could encourage education in different ways, but I still don't believe that it's their responsibility to do so. And I think parents giving their children over to the system in that way is just abdicating their duty that they have under God, for them to train up and discipline their children, and not the state. And anyway, things still happen. You can actually, in that sermon that I mentioned with Vodi Bakum, he mentions that, because one of the fears is, well, how can I teach my child? These are professionals and so forth. Well, if you look at general statistics, public school teachers, those who just go to school and get the degree to teach at public school, they are amongst, generally speaking, I'm not saying this is an attack at all public school teachers and so forth. I think we do need God fearing public school teachers in the system, and being light out there. But generally speaking, they are amongst the lowest scoring test wise block of students and so forth. And so it's not like it's a facade to think that you couldn't do what it's proposed in culture that they can do and so forth. But even if you have a good Christian teacher in the public school system, and they're not pushing the tranny stuff and everything, it's still the government decided curriculum that is training up your children, and your children are around a lot of other unbelieving children throughout the day. It's not just what's being taught and so forth in that way directly from the teachers, but it's also the environment they're around. The Bible is very clear that the wise walk with the wise. That's Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20. The wise walk with the wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. And so, your children are also being raised by worldly thought around worldly children who have folly bound up in their heart, and are leading your children in that way as well.
That is so good. I think people forget that part a lot. Just all those other students, they are going to be a huge influence on your children.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Th- Those are not the people you want influencing your children.
Yeah. Because I know you wanted to get in some fears and stuff. But in one of the fears being, like social skills and everything, like that's not really the type of social skill. Look, I went to public school. I know the type of social skills that you learn at public school, and it's not the kind that a godly Christian parent wants their child to learn. Like I exited the public school system not wanting at all to live the life that I'm living today. And I'm thankful that by the grace of God, I was converted, and I'm able to begin a new step and a new path for the next generations of my family, because how I'm able to lead them and care for them, and leading them in the right way. I exited the public school system totally thinking about, and I know some don't, but I just, generally speaking, I think this is true, it, as it is in my experience. I exited the public school system just wanting to live my life for me, and that's pretty much it.
Well, you're knocking out all the ones I was going to ask about, all these fears. But we'll drill down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Go ahead.
the socializing. I was homeschooled all my life, and I think the socialization worked out just fine.
Sure.
What are you doing to make sure your kids are socialized in a good way? What can people do on that?
Well, I think just, I mean, having a good relationship with your children, actually being a part of their lives, socializing with them. And we are a part of, like, different co-ops and stuff. There, you don't It's not like you're all alone. I mean, some people may be if they can't find a good co-op in their area and so forth, but there's other families that homeschool around us, and they are around other children, and it's just a total difference. Like I remember the first times that I went to some of these gatherings and was around some of the homeschool children. It's totally different. You go around public school kids, for the most part today, they're glued to their phone. They're actually not sociable at all. Several times I've been in a restaurant here recently with my wife, and I mean, you can just see whole families, and they're just glued to their phone the whole time. They're very selfish. They're not thinking about others. You look at a gathering of homeschool kids, and you got kids playing together well. You have older kids taking care of the younger kids. And there's just more of a relationship. There's more of a love there. Again, going to public school and with my raising, which was not just I went to church, but it wasn't just a thoroughly Christian raising. My outlook when I was a kid, even towards my siblings, is totally different than the outlook that my children have being homeschooled, because they live life together, they care for one another. Some of my older children even change the diapers for our younger children. They care for them in ways that is totally selfless and loving, and it's helping them see what life is really about socially and in the family, and it changes their whole scope of life for the good.
Good stuff. I'm only just starting. Eldest are almost 3. They're twins. And already that's one of my favorite parts of parenting is watching my kids serve each other. And you can totally encourage that. I love it. Especially when we were all sick this week. One kid would be not really sick and the other one would be really sick and throwing up. And so it's like, okay, one kid is helping take care of the other and just really excited about helping. It's really amazing. Anyway, little plug there for parenting. Good stuff. So we talked. So socializing, not hard to get that done. You can do it way better than the public schools. You can't teach your kids. Yes, you totally can. There are so many. Even if you're not super educated, there's so many resources nowadays. I'm
Correct.
sure you started out when you started out. There were quite a few fewer resources than there are today.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of good resources out there. There's good curriculums you can find. One that we started using when we first started, and we still use it across the board up to around where our kids are, around like the sixth grade area. But it's called Easy Peasy All in One Homeschool. You can look that up online, but it's a Christian base, and they have curriculums up to all ages, and it's free. And so that's a really good resource to have if you're worried about finances or anything.
nice. And that was my next question about people worry about the cost. Now, part of that cost that people are worried about is because the kids go to school, mom can go to work. If
Hmm.
mom can't go to work, how are we going to make finances work? Can you speak to that fear a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I would say I think nature teaches, and I think the Bible teaches specifically that mom shouldn't be out in the workforce. That would be my conviction. That's what we would teach in our church. That's how we would shepherd our members. I mean, Paul's very clear in 1 Timothy 5 and Titus 2 that a mother is to be working at home, loving her husband, loving and teaching her children, and so forth. Feminism has just done a lot of damage in our culture and society today. It's just a complete lie. A woman is not more free by going and submitting to some man at a workplace who doesn't care about her at all, other than how she can produce for him and make him money. She's not more free doing that than uh, you know submitting to her man, her husband, as she's been commanded to, who does love her and wants to care for her, and just living out her God ordained calling as the suitable helpmate for him, and to bear and raise children, and just do a wonderful work in ministering life into the home and into society as she helps raise up these children who will be living out to the glory of God and for the benefit of our fellow man as they're sent out into into creating more households and so forth. And so, yeah, I would encourage anyone to, if they're worried about that, hey, we live in America, and there's a lot of things that we think we need that we probably don't need. And so, look at your spending habits. Maybe there's some things you need to cut out of your life. Maybe there's some things that you're paying for through mom's paycheck that you don't even need. But I would encourage anyone to, if they're not in that position, to start working to somehow get into that position. And if you're in a godly church, if I had we all homeschool at our church, but if I had someone who was in that type of situation and they were thinking about it, I'd try to seek to come around them and help them some way, even if it's at first, helping. I mean, well, I know our moms would want to come together and give her advice and help her on how to homeschool and things to go through that. But it's definitely something that needs to be done. I would say it is God's ordained will. I wouldn't say that this is a liberty issue. And so, if you love Christ and you want to keep his commandments and you want to glorify him the utmost in your life and be a blessing to, from the husband perspective, a blessing to your wife and to your children, you need to work to get her in the home.
Good stuff. I like what you said about priorities, basically. If you don't need 3 cars, you don't need a boat,
Right.
maybe you don't need that big mortgage, maybe you could do with a smaller mortgage. We're talking about the souls and the future of your children.
Right. Absolutely.
Maybe you can't make that work and not starve, but if you're in America, you probably can.
Yeah.
So,
You cut out a vacation. You cut out. It's not that having those things is wrong, but if those things are getting in the way of this is way more important than that.
absolutely. Okay, well, we're getting on in time, but I do want to have you speak a little bit about the practicalities of those first steps. Your kid is in public school. You've decided, okay, I must change this. I must get him out and start homeschooling him. What's the first steps? How do you start?
Well, I mean, some of these I don't know if they're just direct order, but I mean, you certainly want to be teaching these things to your child. You want them to understand why, at least, even if they're, I guess, depending upon how long they've been in the public school system, and they think, maybe they bought into the lies that they're not going to be sociable, they're going to be weird, and oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to play sports and stuff like that. They still need to understand, thus saith the Lord. Just the same thing with what we talked about going along with the family worship episode. You've been in their life. God's placed you in their life to teach them, to command them in his way. He is their creation, and in his presence is fullness of joy, and at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. And they need to at least hear the words and come to an understanding that they're not going to have more joy in their life apart from living out the will of their God. And the will of their God is to not be in being indoctrinated in a place that for hours upon end they're taught to think about things totally separated from him who gave him those truths. So they need to be talked to about that. And then, I mean, it's not. I mean, we're in Texas. I don't know how. I'm sure it's different in different states and stuff. But I mean, we just went and told the school that I think we had to sign a paper or something saying that um, that we were taking him out, but it wasn't a difficult thing or anything like that. And then you just we've mentioned about that there's curriculums and so forth. Look up curriculums, see if there's a co-op around you. That's not a bad thing to be a part of, so that there's other, there is other kids that they can play with. And I mentioned sports just a minute ago. That can be kind of a fear and so forth. There are sports that your kid can still play, but again, sports is not, it's not more important than this. And some people, yeah, I guess to an extent, sports can teach good character and so forth, but it's obviously not like the utmost there. I mean, there's a lot of very immoral people in professional sports, so it's not like that grows and builds. So this is definitely an important thing. So the first, yeah, so you want to talk to your children about it, get them out, find a curriculum, and then get to it. Begin taking the responsibility for your child's education. And there can be things other than, we've halfway spoken before at our church about starting some type of maybe a co-op, like a communal effort where you get together and the different parents are involved in teaching the children different subjects and so forth. But you're still in that sense being responsible for what your child is being taught. The whole thing here is this is your duty, this is your responsibility. And so, just like anything else that you have a duty and a responsibility to do, you need to, well, I mean, one thing would be you need to confess your sin to God, that He would be faithful and just to forgive you and cleanse you of your unrighteousness, and then trust in Him to equip you with that which is needed to do it. Just to add something, because I mentioned earlier about with feminism and a wife going and working for a man that doesn't care about her other than her production. I'd want to give this encouragement as well. You may not think that you have, everything that it takes to teach your child and so forth, but a big thing that you have that any public school teacher or the government does not have towards your child is an affection towards them as that you ought to have as their parent, wanting them to succeed, wanting them to do well in life. That's something that you have that no other person has, and that's really going to take you far and take you a lot of places in this regard. And in many ways, you might be learning things right along with your child, because going through the public school system myself, there are things that I learned, perspectives concerning certain things that I learned that I would not have now, and I'm able to correct that and teach that to my children. For the most part, my wife I think this is going to be general across the board as men are out working and providing. For the most part, my wife is the one majority involved in it, but I am a part of it where I can be. I do teach history to the children. That's one thing that I've taken up to do. So there's different books that I choose to read through with the children in that. But just
Nice.
get to it. It's not, like I said, I don't know how it is in different states and stuff, but in Texas, it's not really hard.
Yeah, you can start today. At least in
Correct.
Texas, you can just pull them out, and and if it's different in a different state, it's worth the trouble. Yeah, take them
It
out.
is.
Start building that little uh, bookcase of really good, solid books for them to start reading at home. That's one of the things my parents did. They really instilled a love of reading in us, and I got so much of my history from that.
That's wonderful. That right there is a big deal, because that's one thing. Looking back at my education through the public school system, is I just had a totally selfish view of, what do I want to know, what do I want to excel at. It's no one's instilling within me, this is important for you to know. No, it's important for you to know these things, and why. Even that undergirding there is a big deal. And it may be, I'll give this encouragement. It may be hard at first, but I want to go back to, it's not. This isn't a liberty issue. God calls us to things that are uncomfortable. It may be hard, but the Lord will provide. He who began a good work will continue it. Seek Him, find your joy in Him, and find your joy in the fact that you are doing things the way He would have you do them. So, regardless of how hard it is, He is there with you. He's there with you. His word is there with you. Find your encouragement in Him and trust yourself to your faithful Creator while doing good. I've heard some parents say before, just in conversing with my wife through different contexts of us meeting, but they'll say things like, "We tried it for a little bit and it just wasn't for us." And really, my response is that I don't think I don't agree that you have that decision. It is for you, because I believe God says in His Word that it is for you. It's your responsibility. There's a lot of things in our life that we could say, are tough or are hard. I mean, a marriage is tough and hard, but we still, it's a joyful thing, and we love one another and we grow in our love. And it's the same thing in how a family is to function rightly under the ordained will of God.
Good stuff. So on that note, what are your thoughts on a Christian school, kind of like maybe what the Ogden guys do? Do you think that's
I don't have a problem
advocating
with
your good?
Well, yeah, I don't have a problem with that, because then there's still, and now I don't know, honestly, I haven't looked into, I don't know how their school specifically functions and so forth, but I would still say that the parent should have some ability to have a say into what's being specifically taught and so forth. And I don't imagine that the parents at Ogden are going to have a problem with what their pastors or that school that's tied to that church is teaching them and so forth. But yeah, I don't have a problem with a private school situation. I would say that I prefer homeschool because I still think they're depending on how long you're staying in the private school, throughout the day, you're not getting that familial bond that you're having throughout the day like you get in homeschool. But other than that, I mean, you are getting a good education, which needs to be done.
Good stuff. I like the balance. I like it. There's multiple ways to fulfill your responsibility. Sending your kids to the world ain't it.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Don't send them to the world and then be surprised when they come back as the world. You look out in the culture today, and a lot of it is public school has to do with a lot of our mess today.
That quote from Vodi Bakum goes so hard. I didn't know there was a full sermon on it. I had seen the quote, but I have to check that out. That's very good.
Yeah, and I'll mention here at the end, there's another good little book. It's really more of like an essay called On Secular Education by R.L. Dabney. You can find it on Amazon. Canon Press published one a few years ago, but I've read that as well. And I mean, Dabney, speaking in the middle middle of the 1800s, he's almost like a prophet to what the end of secular education would look like in regards to the culture. Things that he says would happen is exactly what we're seeing today, with an immoral culture and a people who really are just devoid of really any accurate historical knowledge. Because when you seek to teach things from a secular perspective, there's things that you got to leave out because you can't, you don't want to have a bias towards certain things, which ends up being a bias in and of itself against the truth.
Interesting. And even if, like you said, even if we were a Christian, a fully Christian nation again, homeschooling, you're just going to get a better education with artisan one-on-one education as opposed to mass produced, top down. Everybody's going to do this. You can personalize, and
Sure,
that
absolutely.
parental affection is such an important part. Well, Pastor Munn, this was really good. I appreciate your time coming talking to us once again. I think I forgot to ask you this last time, so I'll ask you this time. Where can people find you? Hear more from you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you linked my YouTube, well, the church's YouTube channel to it last time. But yeah, you can look up Christ is King Reformed Baptist Church. It's in Wills Point on YouTube. I'm on X as well. My handle is Christ is King underscore TM. The TM is just for my name, Trenton Munn. And Christ is King is, I guess you could say it has a dual meaning because Christ is King, but it's also happens to be the name of the church that I'm an elder at as well. Yeah, that's majority wise where you can find me on it. I mean, I have a Facebook. If people have Facebook, I just got on X for the first time about a year ago, and so I'm a little newer to X, and it's really a different world than Facebook. I've had that for several years, about over 10 years for sure. But you can look me up on Facebook. I'm on YouTube and also on X.
Well, you put great stuff out on Twitter, on X, and everybody should go follow you there. Pastor Munn, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm.